industrialization and the rise of the modern city in England. Industrialization changed the form of urbanization in the modern period. However, even as late as the 1850s, many decades after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, most Western countries were largely rural. The early industrial cities of Britain, such as Leeds and Manchester, attracted large number of migrants to the textile mills set up in the late 18th century. In 1851, more than three-quarters of the adults living in Manchester were migrants from rural areas. Now let us look at London. By 1750, 1 out of every 9 people of England and Wales lived in London. It was a colossal city with a population of about 6,75,000. Over the 19th century, London continued to expand. Its population multiplied fourfold in the 70 years between 1810 and 1880, increasing from 1 million to about 4 million. The City of London was a powerful magnet for migrant populations, even though it did not have large factories. The 19th century London, says the historian Gareth Stedman Jones, was a city of clerks and shopkeepers, of small masters and skilled artisans, of a growing number of semi-skilled and sweated-out workers, of soldiers and servants, of casual laborers, street sellers and beggars. Apart from the London dockyards, 5 major types of industries employed large numbers: clothing and footwear, wood and furniture, metals and engineering, printing and stationery, and precision products such as surgical instruments, watches, and objects of precious metal. During the First World War, 1914 to 1918, London began manufacturing motor cars and electrical goods, and the number of large factories increased until they accounted for nearly 1/3 of all the jobs in the city. Transport in the city. The London Underground Railway partially solved the housing crisis by carrying large masses of people to and from the city. The very first section of the Underground in the world opened on 10th January 1863 between Paddington and Farrington Street in London. On that day, 10,000 passengers were carried, with trains running every 10 minutes. By 1880, the expanded train service was carrying 40 million passengers a year. There was massive destruction in the process of construction of the Underground Railway. Houses were knocked down, streets broken through and stopped, deep pits and trenches dug in the ground, enormous heaps of earth and clay thrown up. Thus the London Tube Railway led to a massive displacement of the London poor, especially between the 2 world wars. Yet, the Underground eventually became a huge success. As a result, the population in the city became more dispersed. Better planned suburbs and a good railway network enabled large numbers to live outside central London and travel to work. These new conveniences wore down social distinctions and also created new ones. Social change in the city. In the 18th century, the family had been a unit of production and consumption, as well as of political decision-making. The function and the shape of the family were completely transformed by life in the industrial city. Ties between members of households loosened, and among the working class, the institution of marriage tended to break down. Women of the upper and middle classes in Britain, on the other hand, faced increasingly higher levels of isolation. Although their lives were made easier by domestic maids who cooked, cleaned, and cared for young children on low wages. Women who worked for wages had some control over their lives, particularly among the lower social classes. Men, women, and family in the city. The city no doubt encouraged a new spirit of individualism among both men and women, and a freedom from the collective values that were a feature of the smaller rural communities. But men and women did not have equal access to this new urban space. As women lost their industrial jobs and conservative people rallied against their presence in public spaces, women were forced to withdraw into their homes. The public space became increasingly a male preserve, and the domestic sphere was seen as the proper place for women. Most political movements of the 19th century, such as Chartism, a movement demanding the vote for all adult males, and the 10-hour movement, limiting hours of work in factories, mobilized large numbers of men. Only gradually did women come to participate in political movements for suffrage that demanded the right to vote for women or for married women's rights to property from the 1870s. By the 20th century, the urban family had been transformed yet again, partly by the experience of the valuable wartime work done by women who were employed in large numbers to meet war demands. The family now consisted of much smaller units. Above all, the family became the heart of a new market, of goods and services, and of ideas. Leisure and consumption. For wealthy Britishers, there had long been an annual London season. Several cultural events, such as the opera, the theatre, and classical musical performances, were organized for an elite group of 300 to 400 families in the late 18th century. Meanwhile, working classes met in pubs to have a drink, exchange news, and sometimes also to organize for political action. Many new types of large-scale entertainment for the common people came into being, some made possible with money from the state. Libraries, art galleries, and museums were established in the 19th century to provide people with a sense of history and pride in the achievements of the British. Music halls were popular among the lower classes, and by the early 20th century, cinema became the great mass entertainment for mixed audiences. British industrial workers were increasingly encouraged to spend their holidays by the sea so as to derive the benefits of the sun and bracing winds. Politics in the city. In the severe winter of 1886, when outdoor work came to a standstill, the London poor exploded in a riot, demanding relief from the terrible conditions of poverty. Alarmed shopkeepers closed down their establishments, fearing the 10,000-strong crowd that was marching from Deptford to London. The marchers had to be dispersed by the police. A similar riot occurred in late 1887. This time, it was brutally suppressed by the police in what came to be known as the Bloody Sunday of November 1887. 2 years later, thousands of London's dock workers went on strike and marched through the city. According to one writer, thousands of the strikers had marched through the city without a pocket being picked or a window being broken. The 12-day strike was called to gain recognition for the Dock Workers' Union. From these examples, you can see that large masses of people could be drawn into political causes in the city. A large city population was thus both a threat and an opportunity. State authorities went to great lengths to reduce the possibility of rebellion and enhance urban aesthetics, as the example of Paris shows. The city in colonial India. In a sharp contrast to Western Europe in the same period, the Indian cities did not mushroom in the 19th century. The pace of urbanization in India was slow under the colonial rule. In the early 20th century, no more than 11% of Indians were living in cities. A large proportion of these urban dwellers were residents of the 3 presidency cities. These were multifunctional cities. They had major ports, warehouses, homes and offices, army camps, as well as educational institutions, museums and libraries. Bombay was the premier city of India. It expanded rapidly from the late 19th century, its population going up from 6,44,405 in 1872 to nearly 15 lakhs in 1941. Bombay, the prime city of India. In the 17th century, Bombay was a group of 7 islands under Portuguese control. In 1661, the control of the islands passed into British hands after the marriage of Britain's King Charles II to the Portuguese princess. The East India Company quickly shifted its base from Surat, its principal western port, to Bombay. At first, Bombay was the major outlet for cotton textiles from Gujarat. Later, in the 19th century, the city functioned as a port through which large quantities of raw materials such as cotton and opium would pass. Gradually, it also became an important administrative center in Western India, and then, by the end of the 19th century, a major industrial center. Work in the city. Bombay became the capital of the Bombay Presidency in 1819, after the Maratha defeat in the Anglo-Maratha War. The city quickly expanded. With the growth of trade in cotton and opium, large communities of traders and bankers, as well as artisans and shopkeepers, came to settle in Bombay. The establishment of textile mills led to a fresh surge in migration. The first cotton textile mill in Bombay was established in 1854. By 1921, there were 85 cotton mills with about 1,46,000 workers. Only about one-fourth of Bombay's inhabitants between 1881 and 1931 were born in Bombay. The rest came from outside. Large numbers flowed in from the nearby district of Ratnagiri to work in the Bombay mills. Women formed as much as 23% of the mill workforce in the period between 1919 and 1926. After that, their numbers dropped steadily to less than 10% of the total workforce. By the late 1930s, women's jobs were increasingly taken over by machines or by men. Bombay dominated the maritime trade of India till well into the 20th century. It was also at the junction head of two major railways. The railways encouraged an even higher scale of migration into the city. For instance, famine in the dry regions of Kutch drove large number of people into Bombay in 1888 to 89. The flood of migrants in some years created panic and alarm in official circles. Worried by the influx of population during the plague epidemic of 1898, the district authorities sent about 30,000 people back to their places of origin by 1901.